Hey guys, welcome back to week 10 of DA 101. For this week's video, I want to introduce you to the libraries and techniques that you'll be using in this lab, the upcoming lab. It's a really cool topic. It's all about mapping. This is going to be all about integrating the data sets that we have onto maps to make really cool visualizations for seeing where things happen and geographic trends in our data sets, which I think is a really cool thing. Especially you see these sorts of heat maps that we're going to make all the time in the news right now with the spread of coronavirus. Maybe we could use these techniques to study that or something else. To get started, make sure you've got this RMD, the one that I'm working on right now. I'm going to send it out to all of you guys, so make sure you've got it loaded up so you can play around with it. We're going to need to use a few new libraries for this technique. In particular, you'll need to make sure, in addition to all your usual dplyr stuff, we'll need to have our world map installed and also ggmap installed. You guys know how to install packages, so I'll let you take care of the details there. But if you're using your own install, you'll need to do install.packages for both of those things. Keep in mind, all of this is really easy to Google, so if you have trouble using any of the functions, make sure you're looking at the documentation. The data that I want to look at for this lab is really cool, and I'm going to share this file with you too so that you can play around with it. It's a project out of Stanford to create a big database about mass shootings in the US. That's another modern issue that we deal with. So I thought it might be kind of neat to take a look at where mass shootings are happening using these mapping techniques and using the libraries that are available to us in R. The basics are pretty easy to do, and with a little bit of grit and effort, R will let you make publication quality visuals to accompany your projects, which I think is super, super, super cool. Especially in upper level data analytics, it's all about visualization. Maps are a big part of that. So I hope you guys have fun using these techniques and maybe just playing around with your own data set. This mass shooting database that we're about to look at, that's one that I just found on the internet. I thought it looked really cool, so I downloaded it and I played around with it, and now I'm using it as the basis for this lecture. Maybe you'll do something similar in your final project. So let's take a look at this stuff. I'm going to read the CSV, and as always, I'm going to use the head command to take a look at it. Here is the data itself. And you can see this data set doesn't really need metadata or a code book or anything because all the variables are really easy to understand. We've got where they happened, what city, what state. Most importantly, for this exercise, we've got the GPS coordinates where the mass shooting took place, latitude and longitude. All of the data that we're using for these techniques has to have the latitude and longitude accompanying them. And then, so each row of this data set represents a specific event, a specific mass shooting event. We've got all sorts of info for each one. The number of civilian fatalities, number of civilians injured, law enforcement fatalities, etc., etc., etc. There's some really interesting stuff in here. There are even full text descriptions, the date that they occurred, the day of the week, the name of the shooter, how many shooters there were, how old they were, their sex, etc., etc., etc. We've got all sorts of interesting information in this data set. In fact, maybe there's a little bit too much data in this data set. I wasn't necessarily interested in everything here. So one of the first things that I did, you can see in my command here, I used the select command in dplyr to strip out some of the variables that I didn't care about. Remember, minus is an easy way. This little minus, if you use the minus, that means it selects everything except for those things. So I'm taking out the description, I'm taking out the day of the week, taking out shooter name, etc., etc., etc. And I'm storing all of this as MSA data trunk for truncated, in other words, shortened or abbreviated. This is my new data set that I'm going to work with, and you can see it here with all the stuff that I thought was interesting. Oh, one other neat technique that I want to show you. I'm not sure if you might have seen these in one of the labs previously. I don't think you have, though. This starts with is really cool. It's a special function that works just with the select function, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It removes everything that starts with, in this case, data. Let me show you. In the original data set, there's a ton of these variables that start with data. Where are they? Here we go. Okay, here we go. So data source 1, data source 2, data source 3, data source 4. There's like a zillion of these things. And I didn't want to worry about them in my data set, especially because if you've got a really big data set, you guys have seen that that can slow your work down. So I decided to get rid of all of those, and it's easy. Instead of typing them in separately, you can do starts with. That's frequently pretty handy. Okay, so we've got our data. Let's make a plot. I've tried to keep this first plot. Oh, by the way, before I talk more, remember, you can pause these videos whenever you want to, and I strongly recommend that you do. I'm going to talk through this code to try to help you understand what's going on, but you might want to slow it down and think carefully on your own for a second what's going on. Here, I'm making a scatter plot, basically, but the background is going to be a map. And we've got a few things we need to do. First, I need to define the region that I'm going to be mapping from. These functions download libraries from the internet in order to provide you with mapping data. So you need to tell it where in the world to look. All of the coordinates that we use are GPS coordinates. So on this one, for my left and right boundaries, here's left. Excuse me. Don't worry, I don't have coronavirus. Here's left. Here's right. Those are the west coast and the east coast of the United States, respectively. You might need to go look. You might need to go look at an actual map, like maybe Google Maps or something like that, to see what the GPS coordinates are. But you can copy paste from this one, and you can also just kind of experiment and play around. For longitude and latitude, here are the boundaries for the US, and for longitude, that's the left-right one. Latitude is the up-down one. All told, this is basically making a box that includes the United States. Now, based on that, I need to actually construct a map. I've told it what the coordinates are, but here's the really exciting part. GetStatementMap. GetStatementMap is a function in ggmap. You can use the help function to learn more about it. And based on the coordinates that I put in this US map, it's going to download map tiles from the internet, just like Google Maps on your phone does, to construct a map based on this. Two things to watch out for. Whenever you use this, you need to choose a zoom type, and I recommend you start small. If your zoom type is really high, that'll give you a high-resolution map, but it could also take a really long time to download. So I recommend starting with something small, like 5, for example. The maximum, I think, is like 18, maybe, but I don't ever go above like 12 or 13 because then it takes a really, really long time to download. If it seems like your map kind of looks blurry and not very good, maybe think about increasing the zoom type, the zoom amount. The other big variable here is the map type. I've chosen tone or light. You'll see what it looks like in a second. But there are lots of different options. This determines like how your map is literally going to look. Is it going to be like a road map? Is it going to be a terrain map? Is it just going to have outlines? You'll see this one in a second when I run the code. I also want to show you, let's go over to the internet. If you Google this function, here's the documentation for getStamen_map, the function that we were just using. It tells you what all the different types of map types you can use right there. So maybe when you're first using this, try experimenting with some different map types just to see some cool stuff. There's terrain, a bunch of different variations on that. Toner light is the one that I'm about to use. Watercolor is pretty cool. I'll show you that in a second. But maybe you can, the different map types have a different appearance and they kind of convey a different feel and a different sort of information. You might want to think about which one is most appropriate for your project. Okay, so we've downloaded all of our map stuff. Let me run that. Now it's time to actually print the map. The function that we use for this is ggmap, and it works just like ggplot. In fact, it's compatible with all the same mapping elements that you guys have learned all semester in ggplot. So you can even see like here I'm using plus and the labels and geom_point and stuff like that. That's all exactly the same as before. It's just instead of doing a ggplot, we're doing a ggmap because we want to look at stuff on a map. I've tried to keep this one as simple as possible. So I've got some labels here. I'm doing a ggmap. I'm labeling longitude, latitude, and I've got a title for this thing, just some basic stuff. And the only real data that I'm adding to it is the actual MSA data, this truncated mass shooting data. In other words, we're going to see a dot for every mass shooting in the United States. I'm going to go ahead and run this now so we can actually see it. So here it is. This is the map. I think this is pretty cool. We just took this data up here. Here is the actual mass shooting data. We took this, and for every row, remember, we've got longitude and latitude. Those are all showing up as dots here on my map. Awesome. I can see visually where every mass shooting in the United States has occurred. There's some pretty predictable patterns right away. Looks like a lot of them happened in Southern California. These high population density areas, of course, are where these sorts of things happen. Looks like we see some in, Seattle, and of course lots along the eastern beltway here, and even one at Columbus. I remember that one. So cool. This is the basic idea. We are quite literally visualizing our data on a map. And I think the basic techniques aren't too difficult. Specify where your map is going to be, download the map, and then plot it out with whatever data you're interested in. One thing I do want to show you, just to play around with this a little bit, how about let's do this. I'm going to copy paste all this stuff just to show you a really neat variation on this, I think. Let's do a variation size by fatalities. So I just copy pasted all that stuff. One shortcoming with this map is that the dot itself doesn't really tell you much information about the shooting itself. A very common enhancement that people will do with these maps is to change the dot size according to an important measure. And here, I'm going to use the number of fatalities, the number of civilian fatalities, to scale the dot size. In other words, if lots of people died, you'll get a big dot. And if not many people died, we'll get a small dot. The variable in the data set, let's see, it's MA data trunc, $ brings up all my possible options, and it's number of civilian fatalities. This is the variable that I want to use. So I'm going to copy paste that, and I'm just going to put it right here Do you see the size thing over here? The size data does what you think. So I'm going to set my size equal to that variable that we were just talking about. And let's run this. Downloading, thinking, aha, cool. Now we can see not only where these mass shootings were, but also visually it's clear how many people died in each of these mass shootings, so we can see which ones were the most fatal. I think that's really interesting. I guess this is kind of a morbid and unfortunate topic, but if you were trying to study patterns in mass shootings, this would be a very useful starting point for seeing where they happen and how severe they are. Cool. So this is the basic. This technique alone is enough for you to do your lab. Your lab is based on stuff like this. One thing I wanted to do before we move on, I just want to show you different map types. I mentioned earlier that there are different map types available, and I want to show you watercolor because it's cool. Let's do a watercolor map. I'm going to do this exact same map that I just did, except this one, you can see it's downloading that stuff. This one's going to be watercolor. And ooh, looks cool, right? Maybe it doesn't have as much useful information in terms of states and roads and things like that. But perhaps if you wanted your visualization to have an artistic impact, this could be a better map type. So that's one option that you might think about when you're making your report. I think these functions are super fun to just mess around with. Like when I first taught this class, I had never done any mapping stuff before. I'm a math professor. I don't really do a lot of maps. So I spent the weekend just playing around with different data sets. I'm looking at different options and seeing what sorts of cool visualizations I could make. I hope you do something like that too. It's a really fun opportunity, but it's also a really cool way to communicate with data. And that's what this class is all about. Okay. So these two maps we made are really cool. They do show you a lot of information about where mass shootings have happened. I want to show you a neat way to kind of include even a little bit more information, a little bit more analysis in these visualizations. And specifically, I want to do a heat map. I'm sure you've seen heat maps before. I'm going to do a really similar, we're going to use the same data set, still a mass shooting data set. If you compare, you might need to pause and go back or look at the file. I've changed my coordinates here a little bit. I wanted to focus on Southern California, which is my home, and it's also, unfortunately, a place where there are lots of mass shootings. I wanted to take a look specifically at that region to get a feel for where mass shootings were occurring in Los Angeles and San Diego and Orange County. So I played around with the coordinates. You know, you can look on maps online to get GPS coordinates. You might also want to just kind of mess around and play around a little bit to see what coordinates work best for you. Sometimes, especially if you're trying to zoom in on a particular city, like Columbus or something like that, you might need to really play around with the decimal points to get just exactly the right frame for your map that you want to use. I'm using a Zoom Type 8. I'm also using a new map type here. This is terrain, so it's going to give us topographical features of the area that we're looking at. So my command here is kind of busy, and it might look confusing at first. For the most part, it's basically the same. Maybe the first thing I want to show you down here at the bottom, that's exactly what we did last time. I'm just doing a geom point. It's going to show me the points for where everything is. But we've added a couple of new things in here too. There's a geom density 2D and a stat density 2D. These each are going to add something to my map. They're going to add heat lines to show me density. And they're also going to add color so I can see where things are. When you guys are playing around with this stuff, I really recommend that you start with my code that I'm sharing with you right now and maybe just try to tinker around and play around with it and swap some different data in to see what it would look like. Some of these functions are kind of complicated, and the documentation is pretty confusing. So I hope that this is a nice simple example, and maybe you can mess around with different stuff to see what it does. In particular, the size and the number of bins are things that you might want to mess around with to get a different feel for your map. I've also used a color gradient to show, let me show you the map. Here's what the map looks like. So you can see the geom density and the stat density. We've got both the little wavy lines that show where mass shootings are centralized, and we've also got the color to show density too. Orange means there were a whole lot of mass shootings there. Not surprisingly, Los Angeles is the orangest part here, and then it gets bluer and bluer and bluer as you get into the more rural areas because there aren't as many mass shootings there. So I think that's a really cool visualization. Scale fill gradient lets you mess around with those colors, so you can decide exactly how you want them to look. You can change blue and orange to whatever colors you want to form a scale. And scale alpha determines how transparent these things are going to be. Again, I really recommend just spending some time messing around with this stuff. Try to make a map that you think looks cool. Maybe you could do it for your own city with the same database, or if you guys are international, you can do the same thing in other countries also. You just need different longitude and latitude. Okay. So I think what you've seen so far is the most important stuff. I want to show you maybe some extra, a little bit of sugar that you can put on there to make it look even nicer. In particular, annotations. Things like text or rectangles or arrows or stuff like that. They're pretty easy to add on. And let me just show you some examples. If you do a Google search for ggmap annotations, you'll see lots of different examples that you can copy paste from. Here are some examples for you to work with, but make sure you take a look at the help files to know everything else that's out there. I can't give you guys a list of every possible annotation. These are just some examples to get you going. For the map itself, I'm going to keep everything the same. It's going to be a US map. I'm going to do a terrain for this one, and most of the details are going to be the same. I'm still doing a geom density, a stat density, and I'm doing a geom point for all of the mass shootings. The stuff I really want to bring your attention to here are these two annotate lines, this stuff right here. I tried to use a lot of white space to bring all of this together, but notice, just like everything else in ggplot, we're just plussing all of this stuff together. All of these different elements of the plot are just plussed together to stick them all into your map. So for the first one, I'm doing a rectangle. There are different types, and a rectangle is going to drop a rectangle, a little box. My rectangle that I'm doing, I played around with my GPS coordinates. Oh, I want to show you. I wanted to make, when I was thinking of this example for you guys, I wanted to make a box around Columbus, Ohio, because, well, I think of Columbus as my home. I know we live in Granville. I live in Granville, but I'm kind of more of a big city person, and it hurts me to think that I live in Granville, Ohio, so I tell people that I live in Columbus, Ohio. So when I was getting started on this, I thought, I wonder what the GPS coordinates for Columbus are. And the internet, of course, is super helpful. This is the Wikipedia page for Columbus, Ohio, and Wikipedia pages always have coordinates for cities. You can see I'm highlighting it right there with coordinates. And it's 39 north, 83 something west. That's going to be negative 83 in our coordinates. So I played around with those. Here are the coordinates I ended up settling on. They're not necessarily like perfect or magical. I just played around with them to get something that I thought looked good. I chose a color, and I didn't want the rectangle to be filled because I still wanted to see the map inside of there, so I chose it to be transparent. We're also going to throw a little text onto the map. I'm going to label it Columbus, Ohio, to show what we're looking at. And here, again, I had to play around with the coordinates for where it's going to go. But let's take a look at the result. I'm going to run this map. It's thinking, it's downloading the stuff. And here we go. Here is the same heat map that we were looking at a second ago. It might be kind of hard to see on the video. It's easier probably if you look on my website. But you can see I've drawn a little box here around Columbus, Ohio, and it is labeled Columbus, Ohio. I chose red just to hopefully make it stand out a little bit more against everything else. Cool. So if there are particular features of your map that you want to draw the viewer's attention to, maybe you could use annotations like this to emphasize those things. Again, I know there's a whole lot of code going on here. Don't start from scratch. Definitely copy paste the stuff that I've got here for you. That's okay, that's not cheating. Start with what I've given you. Play around with this stuff. Make it yours. I think it's a lot of fun. All of these maps that you're looking at right now, I did exactly the same thing. I found an example on the internet, and I thought, oh, that looked cool. How can I do my own sort of thing? And then I found this mass shooting database. I thought, ooh, that looked cool. It's got a lot of longitude and latitude. I'll use that stuff. And then I tinkered around with it, and the result is what you see, which I think is pretty neat. One other annotation that I want to show you guys, arrows. If you want to literally point at something, this can be a useful visual tool. I thought, how about, just to show you one other example, let's look at the garlic mustard data from our very first few labs way back early in the semester. Doesn't it seem like it's been a long time since we talked about garlic mustard? Okay, so you guys know the garlic mustard data. I guess we can just take a look at it to make sure. The key thing in the garlic mustard data is that it does have latitude and longitude. So we can use this to make a map. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I kept this one pretty simple. For the map itself, I'm doing the entire United States with my coordinates. I'm doing a terrain map. And the map itself, not much going on here. I did a geom point showing longitude and latitude. For color here, it's going to show what the average adult height is. I think this is, we'll see this in a second. It'll give us a feel for the color scale will tell us how tall the plants were. And I stuck an arrow onto this one. This one is going to point to Columbus. You can see the code for the arrow. I tried to use a lot of white space to help you understand everything that's going on. But mostly I just needed to tell it this is going to be a line segment. It's got beginning and ending points. You'll need to mess around with these things to get them to work out right. I want there to be an arrow at the end. Here's how long it's going to be, etc., etc. Let's take a look at the final map. And I know it's probably pretty small in the video. You can see, if you go to my website and use the code on your own, you can maybe see a little clearly. We've got this lovely red line that's pointing straight towards Columbus, Ohio. This is just an example. You might want to play around on your if you're using an arrow, you'll need to play around to get a feel for where you want your arrow to be. But I think it's kind of neat. It's just one more annotation that you can do. I hope that this is a useful example for you guys when you're playing around with your lab. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to show you, just because I think it's super cool. I used color as average adult height, but I really like using size too. I think this is kind of neat. I'm going to change my size. Instead of color, I'm going to use size to be average adult height. Oh, okay. I don't know why it gets grumpy about that. It says, error, average adult height not found. So for some reason, it doesn't know where to look for this variable. That's cool. I know it's a variable of my garlic mustard. So let me take that in. Oh, okay. Maybe that's a little bit too big. Okay, this is cool. I'm live on camera. I have not prepared for this example. This is messier than I hoped. Let's see if I can figure it out. It seems like the size is too big. The dots are too big. I'm thinking out loud with you. How can we problem solve this together? I want to make them smaller. How about, one thing I'm thinking is, let's divide by something. What if we divide by 10? Divided by 10. I mean, let's make everything 10 times smaller. It's gotta help, right? We run that stuff. What's it look like? Okay, okay, cool. That's better. I did not know if that was gonna work very smoothly, but it looks like it does. So now we can see maybe, how about let's even go a little bit more. What if we divide by 20? Oh, cool. Okay, neat. So now we've really got a feel for how tall these plants are. The bigger circles indicate taller plants recorded at that particular site. Maybe that's a useful visualization. You could also use any of the other variables in here too if you wanted to use precipitation or any of the bio 1, 2, 3, 4 variables. There's so much cool stuff you can do to play around with this. So I hope you have fun. All right, there's still some more mapping techniques for us to talk about, but I think that's enough for this video, and it's enough for you to get started on your labs. So good luck, happy labbing. Take a look at the lab online. I've posted the document. If you're watching this, it's up right now. So see you then. Remember, guys, I'm online on Google Hangouts a lot. I'm there Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. That's Eastern time, because I'm in Eastern time. All of the times that I give you, remember that. We're all in different time zones now. Some of you guys are in China, some of you are in India, some of you are in Pakistan. Tim, I think, is in Germany. I think Tim's in Germany. So make sure whenever I say a time, it's always going to be Eastern. I'm on Google Hangouts 10 to 12, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you want to catch me at other times, though, too, email me, let me know. I'm happy to chat with you. I've already worked with a few of you guys on your labs, and I think that even though text is kind of awkward, you can send me screenshots, you can show me your code, and I can help get you guys going on these projects, okay? Cool. All right, well, happy coding. See you on Google Hangouts. Hope you guys are all safe and well. Bye.